Hey guys, welcome to Wood.Work.LIFE. Today we're going to be fixing my old miter saw bench. With the new Ridgid 12-inch sliding miter saw featuring up to a 70-degree miter cut and Kreg's flip stop system. I've been working for quite a while with this 2x4 Basics 12-foot bench. And I also had a Harbor Freight 12-inch sliding miter saw. It was fine, but it really lacked the precision for some of the jobs I was trying to do. And what better time to upgrade than around the holidays? Ridgid runs great sales on these saws around the holidays, and with the 70-degree bevel feature on the new 12-inch saw, I had to try it out. With the flip-out tables with the 70-degree miter saw, to account for the wider bevel, it wasn't going to fit in my old table anyway. Plus, shooting this channel, I've been trying to sneak my fat ass through between my miter saw table and my joinery bench, and realized that it was either time for me to lose some weight or for me to get a shorter workbench and get some more space to move around in here. So before I did anything, I had to modify my workbench. I also took the opportunity to get a real stop system. I used to just have a block of plywood that I would screw in against a 2x4 fence, and it worked all right. But I did a little bit of research, and it turns out that Kreg makes way more than just pocket hole jigs. They have an awesome production stop system called the flip stop. So, kill two birds, one stone. I decided to put in a new stop system, put in a new saw, and shorten on my bench. I guess that's three birds. So let me show you what I'm replacing here. My original bench was a 12-foot workbench built with a 2x4 Basics kit. It took up almost the whole back wall in my shop. And the saw was a Chicago Electric saw, 12-inch sliding miter from Harbor Freight. The stops were hardly really stops at all. More of a rolling stop you'd normally get a ticket for. But I managed to get some good results out of this thing for a long time, but I think it was time for an upgrade. You could also see that the sound that it makes when you start it up was like a turbine on a jet engine, and the saw had really no brake on the blades, so once you got it going, it took forever to stop. And I think it was kind of a safety issue, if nothing else. On this new bench, I'm using Kreg's flip stop system, but let me show you what I was using before. It was basically just 3 pieces of plywood glued and screwed together with a cheap utility knob to screw it in. So all it did was lock the screw into the soft 2x4 that was plain flat, and just gave you a reference surface to be able to stop against. It was accurate enough, but it had its downfalls. For instance, if you tried to go inside of 1/8 of an inch, it would just try to fall back into that previous divot you made. And then also, didn't have any positive feedback for the lock, so you could easily push it out of its stop position. Now it's time to clear out the bench. This bench had served as kind of a lumber cutoff rack and general junk accumulation area. Had to take my old Nicholson vise off and move it over to my joinery bench. Wasn't much of a challenge. And I was also going to take off about 4 feet from this bench. It was originally 12 feet long, but I found that I never really made anything that was longer, wider, taller than 8 feet, so not really much of an issue there. It really was nice to gain back that extra 4 feet in my shop. This saw is a little on the heavy side at 64 pounds, but I've never really been around any 12-inch sliding miter saw that's not particularly heavy, so nothing really new there. It does have quite a few cool features that definitely make it worth the extra weight, but I don't have to drag it job site to job site, so it doesn't really make much difference. It's just going to live right here on my bench, so no big deal. So the 70-degree miter on this Ridgid 12-inch sliding saw really presents a couple of unique challenges. It's got some flip-out wings on the edges of the miter saw table that you have to account for with your miter table you're going to build, so that you can still be able to flip those out and still get that full capacity of the miter. So I went ahead and extended those and then marked a line. Then I got out my project notebook like I always do, went ahead and started taking my length measurements so that I knew how long the table had to be. First measure twice, cut once. And then I measured in a couple spots to make sure that my table hadn't come out of square over time. And it hadn't. It was 23 3/4 inches in depth. Once I got all my measurements written down, I took my piece of plywood and found the squarest corner. Even with plywood, it's a good practice to get into to check for a square corner. It's also just a good habit because it's even more important when you're working with solid woods. Of course, it's going to be the last corner you check every time. Hey, what do you know? There it is. So mark that corner and then make all your measurements from that corner and that edge, just for consistency. Probably should have gotten out the sawhorses this time, but I like to live on the edge. From there, I use what Nick Ferry's got me calling a door board to clamp to the board and run my circular saw against so that I can get a nice straight and square edge. The only other measurement left to get was to get the depth of the miter saw table so that I could make a table that corresponds with that. The best tool for this job is just a combination square rested on the table and just drop the ruler to find your reference surface. Now that I had all my measurements for the tabletop depth, I wanted to go make a test cut on the table saw. So I used the measurement I had with my combination square to set the table saw blade to make a test cut. I took my test cut and laid it out with a straight edge against the table saw table. It doesn't have to be perfectly flush with the tabletop, but as close as you can get it, and so where a straight edge won't catch the edge. Once you get that measurement dialed in perfectly on your fence, then you can go ahead and batch out the rest of those legs. I pre-drilled all of the legs or spacers, whatever you want to call them, for the tabletop using the Kreg K5 jig. This just made it nice and easy because the spacers would kind of automatically square themselves to the table, so it didn't really require as much clamping. You could have done this with clamps or weights or whatever, but I found that the pocket holes are really the best solution for this. So once I had all the dividers pre-drilled with the pocket holes, I went ahead and brushed on a little bit of glue onto the surface of the plywood, the edge of the plywood, and laid out a line of glue on the tabletop. What's nice with this is that the pocket holes kind of self-square the dividers. I still went through and checked all of them with machine squares, but they were within tolerances for doing a nice flat tabletop. I just wanted to make sure that the height was consistent across the whole length of the table. So I screwed these into some marks that I made earlier. Rinse and repeat that a bunch of times, and then I've got my tabletop surface ready to go. I put some glue along the edges of all the plywood dividers. I made sure to get one squared up edge. It turned out the bench wasn't completely square, but it was square enough for this purpose. And then I attached the edge of each of these with clamps, followed by lots of pin nails. While the glue was drying on the bench top, I went ahead and installed a zero clearance fence on the miter saw. This is good for preventing tear out, so you might as well build your system around this. The Kreg flip-stop system requires a 2.5 inch tall, 3/4 inch wide fence. So I took some 3/4 inch plywood and ripped it to 2.5 inches. Then I ripped a separate piece to 1.5 inches to reinforce the front piece. And I pre-drilled that with some pocket holes so I could attach it to the bench later. I glued these two pieces together and attached them with some pin nails to make sure that they had a nice strong bond, and to make sure it was a nice strong straight fence. While the fence was drying, I tapped some holes in the aluminum rails that came with the fence system. It has a clever valley that helps to locate your holes, so don't be intimidated at all about drilling holes into this. It's really easy. I like to attach a straight edge to the fence on the saw, so I can make sure that my auxiliary fence is in the same plane as the saw fence. Then I attach this just with screws in case I have to adjust this later. It was finally time to install the blade and make my first cut. The Ridgid came with a blade, but I always use Diablo blades. This is the Diablo 82 Fine Finish blade. You can help me in this channel by checking out the links below to acmetools.com to buy any of the tools you've seen in this video. I adjusted the fences so they were snug together and made sure they were as centered as I could. Not critical. Then it was time for the first cut. After making this cut, I realized I had to cut a little cutout for the dust hood that's behind the blade. Alright, so I jumped the gun a little bit on installing the tape, but let me walk you through it real quick. So the first step is to go ahead and install the fence and install the visor just somewhere. It doesn't have to be anywhere particular, but maybe roughly centered is fine.
Then you'll get a test piece. You go ahead and lock down the fence and you'll make a cut. I use the edge of my table, but you can use wherever you want. So once you've taken that test cut, go ahead and very accurately as you're capable of, measure that piece. This will make the next step a little bit easier. Now you'll want to mark wherever that reticule is pointed at. Just scratch a little mark in the aluminum. You'll never notice it was there. Once you've taken that accurate measurement, you'll take the corresponding mark on the tape and line that up with the mark that you've made previously on the fence. This will ensure that you're at least close to accurate before you start laying down the tape. Take the measurement that you took and put it right on your mark and smooth it out to the right and left of that mark. This reticule here is going to give you a little bit of adjustment, 1/4 inch, 3/8 of an inch either way. But you want to go ahead and lock down the stop in the same spot again to cut another test piece. Now I'm not sure if you know this, but the most accurate way to measure is to not measure at all. So what we're going to try to do is get another piece that's exactly the same size as the previous piece that we cut from that same measurement. So we'll cut our second test piece, we'll compare it to the one that we cut earlier. So you make your test cut, you take this piece and you compare it to the other test piece that you cut earlier. Now if you run your finger along this seam where the two of these meet together, if you can't feel any difference between the two on either side, it makes no difference, they're the same size. No type of joinery is going to require more accuracy than how accurate the cut that you just made is, and it's going to be repeatable every time.
One of the coolest features about this flip stop system is the flip stop itself. So when you're going to just get a square edge on a board, you can just push the board underneath it and it slides right out of the way. But then when you actually want to make your cut for accuracy, it drops back down and you butt your board just against it like a regular stop. The flip stop system also comes with this production stop. This kind of allows you to quickly just drop something in place and make a quick cut. It's also a little more sturdy if you're going to be, just quickly batching stuff out. So the last thing I'm really going to do with this saw is to make a little table that I can attach to this last section of the fence to. That way I can still adjust out my extension fences so that I can still use the full 70-degree miter in both directions. So to do that, I need to build this little table. It's really simple, just a little cut off of whatever plywood you made with it. Make sure it's a little bit short of the back of the saw here. That way you can slide the fence back and out of the way for the extension fence. And then just two little sections that are cut to the same height as the rest of your table. I'm just going to throw this together real quick with some pin nails and glue, and then I'm going to have to cut this fence, which is terrifying, but we'll see how that goes. Now that the saw and the fence are all finished, it's time to make our first test cut to check for square. So you want to take your resulting cut and you want to mark whatever the corner side was where the cut originated. I guess whatever side was against the fence, you want to mark that somehow so you can reference it. Then you want to take whatever your most accurate square is. Typically it's a framing square because these things are rarely ever off. So your most accurate and longest square that you've got, and you want to just lock it in and see how close it is. So this is actually pretty close. It's closer than I thought it was. I've got a little space off the edge, but that might be just the warp of the plywood as much as anything, because I'm bearing across this whole face here. So I don't really think there's much left to do on this one. With that, what you'll usually want to do is just take a decent size machinist square, take the blade,
lock it into its 0 position. Go with the table, this outside table where the wood's actually going to sit on, not the insert plate, and then just match it up to the edge of the blade as best you can and see if there's any light popping through. And this 0 detent is as perfect really as it needs to be. So we are good to go. So that's really not too interesting, I guess. So it looks like Ridgid does a pretty good job of setting these things up out of the factory. I mean, this is joinery ready as far as square and plumb, so nothing really to worry about there.
I don't know if I got lucky or if the quality control of Ridgid is just that good, but I didn't have to make any adjustments. But if you did have to make any adjustments, it's really as simple as loosening a few screws on the detent ring that's going to go around the bottom of the saw, and just adjusting those detents until you're getting an exactly 90-degree cut. All of the other detents should match up with the 45 and the 55 and the 65 and 70. So it's really just about making sure that 90 is perfect. Hopefully you get as lucky as me and out of the box you don't really need to mess with anything.
One of the features on the saw that I found to be surprisingly useful was the shadow line. So it has a little LED light up here that casts the light down on the blade. And then as you get the blade close to the wood, it draws a nice precise line. You can even see the shadows of each tooth. It's one of the most accurate systems that I've seen. So there's a new miter saw bench. I think I'm going to go back in later and add some drawers down here below, maybe some shelves for some extra tool storage and part storage and whatnot, since I don't use this bench for cutoffs anymore. If you like this video, please like the video and subscribe to Wood.Work.LIFE. If you really like the video, click the alarm button below to be notified whenever I release a new video, every weekish. Dude's got a day job. And if you didn't like the video, hit the thumbs down button and leave a comment. Let's see if the spam filter works. Thanks again for joining me, and remember to keep your tools sharp, keep your mind even sharper.